Why was she the only one in the room who didn't speak? The briefing tent was silent except for the scratch of grease pencils across paper. Shadows clung to the corners, pressing hard against tired faces bent over maps. Orders came with clipped precision. Delay the enemy for 12 hours. No retreat. No promise of rescue. The kind of assignment that was less a directive than a death sentence. And yet Major Cross said nothing. Her silence wasn't submission. It was steel. Every man at that table knew it. The moment her eyes fixed on the penciled choke point, the pass where stone walls rose like a throat ready to swallow steel, her fate was written. Theirs too. But what no one knew, what she didn't let them see, was that beneath the weight of her discipline, her thoughts pulled elsewhere, to the cockpit she'd once flown, the sky she'd lost, the quiet humiliation of being grounded. She wore the ranger's harness with pride, but under it, her flight suit clung like a reminder of the sky she was no longer allowed to command. Why her, why this mission, and why did she accept without a word? Because sometimes the dignity of a soldier isn't in speaking, it's in carrying. When she nodded, the decision was final. The men filed out of the tent with the ritual calm of those who had no illusions left, rifles stripped and reassembled, springs checked, suppressors threaded until flush, explosives weighed in careful hands, radios whispered alive and then died again into silence. It was the liturgy of soldiers preparing to vanish into the forest, the only ceremony they were allowed. Moved among them like a slow current, every gesture deliberate, every glance measured, a hand brushing the edge of a rifle, a nod given without words, and they steadied under her presence. Jokes rose briefly about the fog rolling in faster than their nerves, about the convoy taking its time. The laughter was sharp, brittle, breaking apart before it could settle. But it was survival. They weren't laughing at fear. They were laughing to hold it at bay. Still, there was something hadn't told them. Not yet. By the time the fog rolled down from the ridges, heavy and damp as if the mountain itself exhaled, the rangers were ghosts. Minds buried beneath wet pine needles. Trip flares strung low across narrow paths. Charges hidden beneath roots like seeds planted in dark soil. The forest floor swallowed their movements until even deliberate steps seemed to vanish. The mountain pass wasn't wilderness anymore. It was a chamber of judgment. The pines stood tall, stern, their crowns whispering high above. Resin scented the air, sharp and earthy. Every detail was alive, every tree a witness. The fog was their veil, their silence a weapon. Crouched low, her braid hanging damp against her back, her face calm and eyes sharp. In the gloom, her outline melted into stone and shadow, but her presence anchored them. To her rangers, she wasn't only an officer. She was the stillness that held chaos apart. She was proof that even in blindness, someone could see. And then the engines came. At first faint, a distant growl, low and steady, the rhythm of armored plates clanking in the mist. Boots struck the ground, the cadence swallowed, leaving only fragments of numbers, hints of a force too large to face head-on. The fog twisted the sound, scattering echoes through unseen corridors. The convoy was near. Pressed her cheek to the cold stock of her rifle. The scope cut a circle of clarity through the gray. Outlines of trucks emerged, men shifting rifles, shadows carrying weight and fear. Faces hidden, numbers obscured. The fog deceived, but inside that circle of glass she found fragments of truth, enough to know where to strike. Still she hesitated, not because of fear, but because she knew the moment she gave the signal, silence would end, and silence was all they had left. Her breath was steady. The forest leaned inward with her, branches swaying like they too listened for her decision. And then the mountain erupted. The first mine tore the lead truck apart, steel bending, fire blooming, dirt and shrapnel hurled skyward. The second mine ripped open the next vehicle, spilling men and flame into the mud. The pass convulsed with thunder. Engines screamed. Brakes shrieked. The convoy staggered in panic. Men spilled out, rifles raised, their shouts crashing into echoes that twisted and scattered. Orders were shouted, but no one knew from where. The fog betrayed them, carrying voices in circles until command unraveled before it could take hold. And then the rifles whispered. Fired first. Through the scope she saw an officer lift his arm to rally his men, and in the same instant he dropped. Red bloomed against gray. Another officer pointed, his voice cutting through the chaos until her bullet silenced him mid-command. Panic spread like disease, soldiers searching for leadership and finding only corpses. Her rangers followed, their shots measured, deliberate, never wasted. Each one folded another man into the mud, another shadow swallowed by fire and fog. The enemy broke apart, discipline fractured. Some fired wildly into trees, bullets splintering bark where no soldier stood. Others screamed conflicting orders, echoes twisting into nonsense. Squads fired at their own shadows. One burst of gunfire cut down comrades mistaken for phantoms. Fear was the new commander. Through it all was steady. Her breath slow, her rifle precise. Her rangers moved on her gestures alone, a hand flick sending a squad forward, two fingers drawing others into the mist. They shifted like ghosts, striking and vanishing before return fire could find them. The enemy named her in their fear. They whispered of the wraith. And already that whisper was becoming truth. But knew something her men did not. This was only the beginning. The fog was their ally now, but fire always thins mist. Artillery always finds its range, and the enemy would not surrender to shadows forever. She carried that knowledge like a stone pressed deep inside her chest. Her silence remained, her steel unbroken. But inside, where no one could see, a question grew sharp. How long could she hold them here? And at what cost? The night stretched, heavy with smoke and whispers, the mountain itself waiting to see who would endure. And in that waiting, in the pause between fire and silence, Cross felt the first weight of what she hadn't told them. Not yet. The first mortar round didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like a whisper, a hollow whistle falling through fog before it ripped the hillside apart. Soil and stone exploded upward, shrapnel scattering, clattering against trucks, biting deep into pine trunks. The mist swallowed the blast almost as quickly as it had revealed it, closing its curtain, pretending nothing had happened. But then the second round came, then the third. And the mountain roared. Explosions tore at the slopes, flashes staining the fog sickly white. Shadows leapt, bent, vanished. Enemy infantry crouched low, rifles trembling, their advance hidden behind blind barrages. Boots churned mud, bayonets glinted in pale fire, their commander's voice cracking like a whip in the chaos. Forward, forward, flush them out. Cross stayed low, her cheek pressed to earth damp with pine needles and ash. Her ear rang with each concussive blast, yet her breath remained steady. Her men waited for her signal, their discipline stretched thin by the pounding earth. She watched their eyes wide, darting but tethered to her stillness. And though they couldn't see it, her ribs ached with every boom. A phantom pain, almost memory, of another cockpit years before, when anti-aircraft fire had shredded her wings and left her grounded. That sound lived inside her bones. She could feel it now, as if the mountain had decided to remind her of every loss she had buried. The artillery rolled like a tide. Trees cracked, branches fell burning. Dirt rained down on helmets, but the rangers did not move. They became the forest, pressed to the earth unseen. When the barrage slowed, when the smoke thickened into something almost tangible, she raised her hand. Just a flick. The forest answered. A hidden charge snapped a tree loose, sending its massive trunk crashing across the path. Men scattered, shouting, some believing the mountain itself had tried to crush them. Moments later, a trip flare hissed to life, casting pale fire through the mist. Soldiers fired wildly into the glow, believing they had found their enemy. But there was nothing, only empty ground. Had turned their fear into a weapon. Still, her chest tightened, because fear alone wouldn't hold forever. From her left flank, a ranger whispered over comms, voice low, almost swallowed by static. "They're probing. Small squads pushing deeper." She knew she could hear it too. Footsteps, faint, breaking rhythm against mud and stone. Shadows inside shadows. Enemy scouts creeping forward, bayonets twitching at phantoms. And then it happened. A squad slipped close, too close. Their rifles jerked at every branch sway, at every breath of wind. They didn't realize the Rangers were already among them. Suppressed fire whispered once, twice, 3 times. Men folded into mud before their comrades even knew what had struck. To those who survived, it seemed their fellows had simply vanished, stolen by the fog itself. The name grew louder now, the Wraith. It passed between soldiers' lips in hushed tones. Fear shaped itself into myth, and myth into truth. But fear has limits. Another mortar shrieked down. Another. The enemy was pushing harder, their vehicles grinding forward, turrets sweeping, machine guns raking the tree line. The pinned squad on its right flank was losing cover by the second. She heard it in their voices, calm but straining, their breathing quick, the edges of panic pressing in. Her choice came before hesitation could grow. She signaled, covering fire, her hand slicing through air. Her rangers answered instantly, unleashing disciplined volleys to pin the advancing infantry, and then broke from her position. She sprinted across mud churned by blast craters, bark and stone raining around her. Bullets cracked above, one tugging at the braid hanging down her back. She slid into cover beside the pinned squad, her rifle snapping to position, her presence pulling their scattered discipline back into shape. Her side burned. She felt it before she saw it, a hot tearing along her ribs as shrapnel grazed her. She clenched her jaw, blood dampening her flight suit beneath the harness. She didn't let it show. Couldn't. Not while her men's eyes clung to her steadiness. She raised her rifle, firing with calm precision, directing short bursts, hand signals sharp and deliberate. Rangers moved under her rhythm, crawling, sprinting, reloading, grenades arcing out to scatter enemy infantry. She waved them forward, even as her own blood trickled warm. Pain was hers to carry, not theirs. By the time they regrouped behind a ridge, the fog itself seemed thinner, burned apart by heat and fire, drifting into tatters. Shafts of sunlight pierced through in pale knives, the advantage of ghosts slipping away. Rose just enough to be seen, her figure outlined against smoke. It was bait, and the enemy took it. Their commander roared for pursuit. The convoy surged forward, vehicles grinding into the throat of the pass, infantry pressing tight behind. And with a single signal, gave the mountain its voice. Charges detonated in sequence, a roar that split stone, cliffs convulsed, slabs tumbling into the road, pines crashing like titans. Dust joined fog until the air became a choking storm. Retreat was gone. The enemy was sealed inside. And then silence broke. Suppressed rifles whispered death. Grenades rolled beneath vehicles. Blades slid between ribs in close quarters. Silent deaths delivered before bodies even hit the ground. The pass collapsed into brutal, hand-to-hand chaos. Screams cut short. Pistols cracked muffled bursts. Faces appeared only for the instant of death before vanishing back into gray. Fought among them. Her rifle steady, her commands clipped precise. To the enemy, she was nowhere and everywhere, the phantom they had named. A figure glimpsed only in the heartbeat before death. But deep inside, as she pressed her shoulder into the stock of her rifle, as her ribs burned hot with pain, she knew something the enemy could never guess. She was not invincible, and neither were her men. When she steadied her scope and saw the enemy commander himself charging through the smoke, rifle raised, voice cutting across the ruin, fury holding his scattered men together, felt the weight of her burden press sharp against her heart. He was their last will, their last anchor, a figure too proud to break. She steadied her breath, one pull of the trigger. And when he fell, swallowed by mist, the battlefield stilled. The mountain exhaled again, the pass quiet once more. Yet for silence never meant peace. It only meant the next storm was waiting. How do you measure victory when the silence feels heavier than the fight? The fog crept back down the ridges as if the mountain was reclaiming its breath. Fires hissed against damp air, sputtering until only faint orange glows pulsed inside the mist. The ground smoked in broken circles where mortars had struck. Twisted steel steamed in the mud. Broken trucks leaned at strange angles, wheels still spinning slowly as if refusing to accept they would never turn again. The pass was quiet now, too quiet. Rangers moved carefully among the wreckage, their boots soft on the carpet of pine needles. They didn't speak louder than a murmur. Their grief carried itself in silence because words felt obscene here. Rifles rested across the bodies of the fallen, helmets lowered, faces hidden beneath scarves and cloth torn from uniforms. It wasn't ritual. It wasn't doctrine. It was instinct, the way soldiers made sense of death when no ceremony had been promised. Cross walked among them. Her side burned where shrapnel had grazed her, blood drying against her ribs, but her posture never faltered. She wouldn't add her weakness to theirs. Each step was measured, her braid brushing damp against her back, her boots steady on uneven ground. She paused at each covered body, one hand brushing across the rifle left in tribute, her gaze locked steady and unflinching. Her men needed her stillness. They needed to believe she was unbreakable. But inside, where no one could see, she felt herself bending. How many times had she walked through the aftermath like this, counting the missing, covering the dead, whispering the names in silence so the mountain would carry them when she could not? It was a weight she carried differently each time, but never lighter, always heavier. One ranger knelt by a comrade, his gloved hand pressed firm against the man's chest as though holding him there a little longer, as though his own breathing could will life back into him. Another placed a scarf gently across a lifeless face, hiding it from the fog that clung like a shroud. And beside them, others stood shoulder to shoulder, their silence more crushing than any gunfire had been. His jaw tightened. She had promised them nothing at the briefing table, not survival, not escape, only her silence, only her steadiness. And now she looked at the covered bodies and felt the question press sharp against her chest. Was it enough? The forest gave no answer. The enemy convoy lay shattered, twisted metal black against gray fog. Their commander, once defiant, was now just another shape half buried in mud, forgotten by the echoes he had shouted. His men, what remained of them, were scattered shadows. Some crawled into the trees, bleeding and broken. Others lay still, their rifles dropped in panic or defiance. The whispers of the wraith would live longer than their voices. That much she knew. But what lingered inside her wasn't triumph, it was dread. Because she hadn't told her men the whole truth. They thought they were the ambush, that this fight was the mission, but had seen enough maps, enough scattered orders, enough silences in the commander's voice to understand the truth. This wasn't the storm. This was the warning. The battalion that had marched into this pass was only the beginning. And the weight of it pressed down on her, as if the mountain itself leaned on her shoulders. Her side throbbed. She pressed her palm against it briefly, her glove coming away tacky with dried blood. No one saw. She wouldn't let them. Pain was hers to carry alone. "Ma'am," a ranger whispered, appearing beside her. His eyes flicked toward the bodies lined neatly in the fog. "What do we tell their families?" His gaze lingered on the rifles laid across fallen chests. She didn't answer at first. What words could carry that weight? What letter, what explanation, could make sense of silence that would never lift? Finally her voice was low, steady. "That they stood, and that's enough." The ranger nodded, his throat tight before turning away. But's chest ached with the lie, because even if it was enough for the world, it never felt enough for her. She closed her eyes briefly, listening. The fog wasn't silent. It never truly was. It breathed. It carried whispers through pine boughs, resin-scented and damp. It carried memory, and she wondered how many voices it had carried before hers, how many nameless soldiers it had hidden and swallowed long before her name would be written into its legend. She opened her eyes. The mist folded around her like a cloak, clinging to her braid, her harness, her boots. To her men, she was still their commander. To the enemy, she had become something less human, a shadow, a story. But to herself, she wasn't sure anymore. And maybe that was the heaviest part of all. The Rangers regrouped quietly, weapons checked, positions reinforced. No one spoke of rest. No one dared. They knew what knew, even if she hadn't spoken it aloud. The mountain wasn't finished. Not yet. For hours they worked in silence, gathering ammunition from the dead, resetting charges, shifting positions deeper into the pass. Every sound muffled by fog and grief. Oversaw each motion with sharp eyes, but inside she moved slower, each step pulling at the wound in her side, each command draining a piece of the strength she kept hidden. When the work was done, when the forest grew heavy again with the weight of waiting, she allowed herself one moment, one breath. She stepped away from her men, into the trees where the fog thickened. She let herself lean against a pine, the bark rough and grounding against her shoulder. Her breath trembled for the first time all night. She pressed her hand hard against her ribs, feeling the sting sharpen, the warmth of blood seep again through her flight suit. Her eyes closed, and for the first time in hours, she let herself remember. The cockpit, the blue horizon, the sky she had once commanded, the day it had been torn from her, the sound of tearing metal, the silence that had followed when her wings were gone. She remembered the helplessness, the humiliation of standing on solid ground when she had been made for air. Now she commanded earth and fog instead of sky. She wore it like armor. But some nights, when silence pressed too hard, she wondered if she had been sent here not because she was strong, but because she was expendable. Her throat tightened. But even if it were true, it didn't change what she had to do. She pushed herself away from the pine, straightening her shoulders, forcing stillness back into her posture. By the time she stepped back into view of her men, the tremor was gone, the weakness buried. Her silence was steel again. But deep inside, the question lingered. How long could steel hold before it bent? How long could silence last before the next storm arrived? The fog had settled heavy again, thick and unmoving, as though the mountain wanted to bury what had just happened. Rangers sat low against the roots of pines, rifles balanced across their knees, eyes staring at ground they couldn't see beyond an arm's length. The silence wasn't peace, it was waiting, and every man knew it. Cross crouched at the ridge, her scope pressed to her eye, scanning the gray nothingness. Her side throbbed where shrapnel had cut across her ribs. Each breath was shallow, measured, stolen. Her glove pressed briefly to the wound before she forced her hand away again. Not yet. They couldn't see weakness, not when their lives were anchored to her steadiness. She whispered into her comms, voice low and calm, "They'll come again, be ready." And even as the words left her lips, the mountain answered. The rumble started faint, a vibration in the earth, in the soles of their boots, in the marrow of their bones, louder with each second. The ground trembled beneath them. Then the engines broke through, not trucks this time, heavier, deeper, the growl of armored treads. His chest tightened. The first wave had been men and steel. This was the storm. Through the fog, shapes began to loom, shadows too massive to be men. The crunch of treads grinding rock, the swivel of turrets cutting arcs through mist. The air shivered with the rhythm of cannons loading, machine guns spooling. And then the shells fell. Artillery ripped the slopes apart. Pines shattered into splinters. Earth geysered upward, raining mud and stone. Fire rolled across the pass in bursts, smoke curling into the fog until air itself became unbreathable. The Rangers pressed low, their cover shredded, their ears ringing with concussive blasts. One squad cried out over comms, pinned beneath falling trees, caught in the open. Hand moved before thought. She gave orders, sharp, clipped, suppressing fire from the flanks. Grenades into the infantry pressing forward. movements measured in bursts between explosions. But the barrage didn't stop. It pressed harder, relentless. She pressed her cheek to her rifle stock, eyes narrowing into the scope. Her breath slowed even as the mountain convulsed. She sighted one turret, waited, and when the shadow resolved, she fired. The round sparked against steel. Not a kill, but enough to make the gunner duck, enough to give her squad seconds to move. Seconds were all she could give. The enemy pressed forward, infantry stumbling behind their armored beasts. Machine guns tore through tree lines, bullets shredding branches, chewing bark into dust. The air hummed with ricochets. Her rangers shifted position, crawling low, moving silent even as chaos ripped around them. A voice hissed over comms, one of her sergeants. "We can't hold if they push armor through. They'll grind us under." Her eyes stayed on the scope. Calm, steady, she didn't let him hear her hesitation. "We hold no retreat." But inside, her chest burned. Not only from the wound, but from the truth pressing against her ribs. He was right. If the armor broke through the choke point, the valley beyond would fall. Towns, civilians, thousands who didn't even know their lives were balanced on this ridge. She couldn't let her men see the doubt. She couldn't let them see that for the first time, she wasn't sure if they could endure. The mountain shook again, a shell hitting close, dirt raining on her shoulders. Another voice on comms, quieter, hesitant. "How much longer do we—" He didn't finish, couldn't. Her silence stretched a beat. And then she said it, "As long as it takes." It was all they needed to hear. Her men steadied. Their rifles whispered through the chaos. Shots placed clean, deliberate, cutting infantry down before they could regroup. A turret sparked again, smoke bleeding from its hatch. One armored vehicle lurched to the side, its tread torn loose by a hidden charge planted hours before. The machine groaned, shuddered, then stalled. Its carcass burned slow in the fog. But for each one destroyed, more pressed forward. The convoy tightened, pushing deeper into the throat of the pass. That was when made her choice. Her hand flicked sharp signals. Engineers moved quick, their boots light across shattered ground. Charges set deeper into the slopes, wires buried beneath needles and ash. She had saved them for this. For the moment the enemy believed the mountain was theirs. Her side throbbed. Her vision blurred for a second, her knees almost buckling. She pressed her palm hard to her ribs, breath trembling. And then she forced herself steady again. She couldn't fall. Not now. When the lead vehicle pressed into the narrowest point, when the cliffs themselves seemed to lean inward like jaws, raised her hand. And the mountain roared. Charges lit the ridges in thunder. Stone broke loose in massive slabs, tumbling down in avalanches. Pines toppled, their roots tearing free with screams of earth. Dust joined smoke, choking the air until sight vanished. The road collapsed in ruin. Vehicles smashed against boulders, armor crumpling beneath the weight of falling cliffs. The pass sealed shut. Panic spread through the enemy ranks. Soldiers scrambled, firing wild into the haze, shouting commands no one could hear. Armored vehicles twisted against rock, their turrets frozen, their power useless in the choke. And then the Rangers struck. Raised her rifle, her voice low, sharp over comms. "Now." Suppressed shots cracked. Grenades rolled beneath treads, bursting into fire and steel. Knives flashed in the haze, silent deaths delivered at arm's length. Pistols snapped in muffled bursts. The battlefield dissolved into brutal close quarters. Figures appeared only in the heartbeat before they fell. Screams cut short, swallowed by fog. Moved among them, her rifle steady despite the blood at her side, her commands clipped and sure. Her men followed her gestures, her calm, her presence. To the enemy, she was everywhere and nowhere, the phantom they whispered of, the wraith who owned the pass. But inside her chest, the question pulsed with every beat of her heart. How long could she keep this illusion alive? Her ribs burned, her vision swam. She staggered once, unseen in the chaos, her palm pressing hard to her side. She forced herself upright again, her jaw clenched, her silence unbroken. Because if they saw her falter, even once, the mountain would fall. And she couldn't let it. Not now. Not ever. What happens when silence stops feeling like protection and starts feeling like a grave? The pass had stilled again, but not with peace. The fog pressed heavy, hiding the ruin but not the stench. Burnt steel, blood on pine needles, smoke still curling from shattered vehicles, weaving up into the canopy before vanishing into gray. Cross lay flat against the ridge, her chest pressed to the earth, her cheek damp against soil. Her ribs burned with every shallow breath. She bound the wound herself in seconds stolen between orders, a strip of cloth wrapped beneath her harness, pulled so tight it cut her skin. It held the bleeding, barely. Her men didn't see, she wouldn't let them. They crouched in the mist, eyes scanning, rifles resting across trembling hands. Their ammo was low, their faces pale. Hours stretched since the first mine had blown the convoy apart. Hours since silence had become weapon and curse alike. Each man knew what had not said. They weren't fighting to win anymore. They were fighting to last. She watched them from her scope, not the enemy now, but her own. The youngest ranger, barely out of training, rubbing his thumb along the stock of his rifle as if trying to remember what calm felt like. Another, his knuckles raw where he had dug through rock to reset charges, his eyes glassy with exhaustion. A third, whispering names under his breath, the syllables swallowed by fog before they could reach the sky. Names of those they'd already lost. His throat tightened, she forced it down. She whispered into comms, her voice steady though her chest ached. Hold positions, watch the tree lines, they'll probe again. But the truth gnawed at her. They weren't just probing, they were waiting, gathering, rebuilding the storm she had only delayed. Her eyes flicked through her scope, tracing shadows. The pass seemed empty, but she knew better. The enemy hadn't retreated, they'd scattered, regrouped. Somewhere beyond the fog, commanders were drawing lines in dirt, rallying their fragments into something coherent again. And when they came, they wouldn't come with hesitation. The minutes dragged like hours. The fog thickened, muffling the forest, pressing silence so heavy it felt like weight on the chest. One ranger shifted, his boot crunching damp needles, and every man's head snapped toward the sound, hearts hammering, fingers tightening on triggers. That was the edge they lived on now. One sound away from panic. Lowered her scope, her cheek against damp earth. She let her eyes close for a heartbeat, just one. Behind her eyelids came the cockpit again, the horizon she had lost, the sudden plunge, the helpless silence. She shook it away, forcing herself back into fog and pine. She couldn't drift, not now. And then the sound returned. Not faint this time, not scattered. A rhythm, boots striking mud, engines rumbling low, voices carried by fog, indistinct but numerous. The second storm had found its shape. Pressed her palm harder to her ribs, the pain sharp enough to blur her vision. She bit down against it, forced her rifle steady. "Positions," she whispered, her voice iron. "Do not fire until I give the order." Her men shifted silently, rifles raised, every breath measured. Through her scope, shadows thickened. Dozens, maybe more. The fog betrayed numbers but not intent. Figures crouched low, moving in staggered lines, rifles twitching at phantoms. Armor loomed behind them, darker shapes grinding forward. She felt it in her chest, the vibration through the soil, the weight of inevitability. The first wave had been surprise. The second, fury. This was persistence. The kind that ground men down until even silence broke. Her finger tightened against the trigger, but she waited. Not yet. The enemy pushed deeper, stepping over their own dead, bayonets glinting in pale fire. Voices barked commands, echoing off stone, twisting into nonsense. Still they came. And then fired. One shot, silent, clean, a shadow dropped. Her rangers followed, rifles cracking like whispers. Figures folded into mud, their cries cut short, their bodies vanishing into fog. Panic rippled again, soldiers crouching low, rifles flaring wild into the trees. The echoes twisted their panic into chaos, bullets ripping bark from trunks where no ranger stood. But this time, the enemy didn't break. Orders snapped sharp. Squad leaders shoved men forward, voices harsh, discipline holding. Bayonets leveled, grenades hurled blind into the mist. Explosions tore gaps into fog, brief windows of clarity showing nothing but empty ground. And then machine guns roared. Turrets swept arcs across the tree line, cutting branches, shredding soil. The Rangers ducked low, the air alive with snapping rounds. Pressed deeper against earth, her ribs burning, her lungs tight with smoke. "Ammo low," a Ranger hissed over comms. His voice was calm but heard it the edge of fear beneath discipline. "Make every shot count," she whispered back. Her own magazine was nearly empty. She reloaded with calm hands, even as her vision blurred at the edges, her gloves slick with sweat and blood. She couldn't tell which anymore. Her scope found a squad pushing forward, their rifles tight, their fear buried beneath discipline. She tracked the leader, his hand raised, his voice carrying. Her finger tightened. The shot whispered. He dropped. The squad faltered, splintered. That was enough for now. But the pressure didn't stop. Her flank cried out over comms, the sound jagged, desperate, pinned, cut off. She gave orders sharp, fast. 2 men shifted, firing suppressive bursts. Another hurled a grenade that vanished into fog before bursting in screams and fire. The pinned squad crawled back, barely, mud clinging to their harnesses. His breath shook. She pressed her palm to her ribs again, felt the heat there, the wetness. Her knees wavered. She caught herself against the trunk of a pine, her rifle clutched tight. Her men didn't see, couldn't see. But in her chest, the truth pressed sharp. She was bleeding out slow. She forced her breath steady, forced her eyes sharp through the scope, because if she fell now, the mountain would fall with her. And that could never happen. Not while they still trusted her silence. Not while thousands beyond this ridge still depended on it. How do you hold a line when the line itself no longer exists? The fog had swallowed the pass again, but now it wasn't silence that lingered. It was the ragged edge of chaos, shots cracking at random, shouts twisted into echoes, boots stumbling through mud and smoke. The mountain no longer felt like ally or judge. It felt like a tomb waiting to close. Cross pressed her shoulder into the trunk of a pine, her rifle trembling slightly in her grip, not from fear but from blood loss. Her ribs burned with each shallow breath, the makeshift bandage beneath her harness soaked through. She forced the tremor still, her jaw clenched tight. Her men couldn't see. Not now. Not when they were already breaking. "Low on ammo," a voice rasped over comms. Then another. Calm, controlled, but each one sharpened with exhaustion. Magazines nearly empty. Grenades gone. Knives the only sure weapon left. Exhaled slowly, pressing her cheek against her rifle stock. Her scope showed shadows moving, squads pushing forward, bayonets leveled, voices hard with discipline. The enemy had lost fear. They were learning, adjusting. They were coming like a tide now, pressing into the choke point with brute persistence. She squeezed the trigger, a shadow dropped. Another. But when she reached for her next magazine, her glove brushed metal and found nothing. Her breath stalled. Only one magazine left. She closed her eyes for half a heartbeat. Then she slid it home with calm hands, as though it didn't matter. As though her silence alone could bend the truth. The ground shook with another blast. Mortars again, blind, indiscriminate shells raining into fog with thunder that rattled teeth. A pine shattered yards away, its trunk collapsing in splinters, crushing earth and metal alike. The forest convulsed. Rangers ducked low, dirt raining across helmets. A sergeant's voice cracked over comms, sharp with urgency. "Left flank." She was already moving. Her boots churned mud, her sides screaming with every step. She slid into position beside 2 Rangers crouched behind a fallen log. Their rifles lay empty on the ground. One clutched a pistol, the other a combat knife, both breathing hard. Their eyes flicked to her, not with fear, but with the desperate steadiness of men clinging to the last anchor they had. She raised her rifle, fired again. The last of her magazine spat out in steady rhythm. Shadows fell into the mud, their cries swallowed by fog. Then the rifle clicked empty. Silence. Her breath caught in her chest. She lowered the weapon slowly, her gloves slick, her ribs burning. The weight of the empty rifle pressed heavy in her hands. For the first time, she felt naked. The enemy pressed closer, rifles flashing in bursts, bayonets glinting. "Knives," she whispered, her voice steady. The rangers beside her nodded once, no hesitation. When the shadows came through the fog, it was no longer a battle. It was survival. Knives slid between ribs. Pistols cracked point-blank. Blades clashed in silence broken only by ragged breaths and the wet sound of steel cutting flesh. Figures appeared in the mist only to collapse in it, their faces vanishing before memory could form. Moved with ruthless precision, her empty rifle swung as a club, buttstock shattering bone, barrel cracking across jaws. A knife gleamed in her other hand, her motions sharp, efficient, honed by years of discipline. Each strike deliberate, each movement measured, no wasted breath. But her ribs screamed with every lunge, every twist. Her vision blurred, the edges swimming in red haze. She staggered once and almost fell. A hand steadied her, one of her rangers, young, eyes wide but fierce. "I've got you, ma'am." She nodded once, forced her feet steady again, forced the weakness buried deep. She couldn't fall, not here. The fog tore briefly as another blast ripped the ridge, throwing dirt and flame into the air. For an instant, light cut through, showing the pass as it was. Bodies everywhere, friend and foe alike. The ground churned black with mud and blood. Broken weapons scattered. Pines toppled like giants. The pass looked less like a battlefield and more like something ancient, something cursed, where men vanished and were never spoken of again. And still the enemy pressed. A voice hissed through comms, desperate now. "We can't hold, not like this. We'll be cut down." Her silence stretched, her ribs ached, her vision blurred again. And then her voice came, calm, quiet. "Then we hold until we can't." Her men didn't argue, they never did. She dragged herself upright against the pine, her knife slick in her hand, her empty rifle clutched like iron. The fog pressed close again, hiding the ruin, hiding the truth. Her braid clung damp against her back, her shoulders squared. To her men she was still the wraith, still unbroken, still steady. But inside she felt it, the truth cutting deeper than her wound. She was breaking, and the mountain would take her if she let it. But not yet. Not while a single ranger still breathed beside her. Not while silence could still be shaped into steel. How do you know when the end has arrived? Is it when the ammunition runs dry? When the smoke lifts and reveals only ruin? When silence carries more names of the dead than voices of the living? Or is it when you look into the eyes of your men and see that they already know? The fog had thinned to tatters, torn apart by fire and shelling. Pale shafts of sunlight slanted through the smoke, touching the pass in broken fragments. What it revealed was devastation. Pines toppled in tangled heaps. Stone blackened with soot. Metal twisted and burning. Bodies scattered in mud that had turned dark with blood. And in the middle of it all, the rangers. Their numbers had dwindled. Too many rifles lay silent beside men who would never rise again. Those who remained crouched low, eyes hollow, uniforms torn, hands trembling but still steady enough to pull a trigger if they had one left to pull. Cross stood among them. Her braid was matted with blood and ash. Her face streaked with dirt. Her ribs burned with every movement, the bandage beneath her harness soaked through long ago. She could feel the warmth seeping still, slow and steady, a clock inside her chest counting down. But her posture never faltered, her voice never broke, her silence never wavered. Because if she gave in now, the mountain would fall. "Ma'am," one of her sergeants whispered, crouched low beside her. His rifle hung useless, empty. A knife glinted at his hip, the last weapon left. His eyes searched hers. "We can't hold much longer." Didn't answer. She only looked through her scope, her cheek pressed tight against the stock. Through the glass, shadows moved again. More infantry, more shapes in gray. The enemy had bled, had broken, had been scattered and cut down. But still they came, persistence given form. The sergeant swallowed. "They'll grind us down, one by one." Silence stretched. Then finally her voice came, quiet, calm, steady. "Then they'll have to take us one by one." The sergeant exhaled, his jaw tight. He nodded once. That was enough. The Rangers shifted into new positions, what little cover remained. Empty magazines clinked against stone. Knives slid free of sheaths. Pistols were checked. The last rounds counted in whispers too low for the fog to carry. They had no illusions left. Through the scope tracked a squad pushing forward, their rifles raised, their steps cautious. She tightened her finger but stopped. Her rifle was empty. She had known it. She had accepted it. Still, the truth cut sharp in the moment of hesitation. She lowered the weapon slowly. It felt heavier than ever. Her hand went to her knife instead. The fog thickened again, rolling down from the ridges like the mountain itself was trying to hide what was about to happen. The enemy pressed deeper into the choke point, their voices sharp, their boots heavy. They believed they had cornered the ghosts at last. Raised her hand. Her rangers saw it, and they rose with her. The fight that followed was not war, it was slaughter. Knives flashing in silence, pistols cracking at arm's length, figures colliding in mud, grappling, striking, breath hot against faces smeared with dirt and blood. Screams cut short, shadows vanishing into fog before memory could form. Moved through it all like a figure carved from stone. Her rifle swung as a club, buttstock shattering bone, barrel cracking jaws. Her knife flashed in her hand, her strikes efficient, deliberate, honed by discipline. Each movement precise, each step controlled. But her ribs burned, her vision blurred. She staggered once, knees buckling, before forcing herself upright again. A ranger saw it, the young one, barely more than a boy. His eyes widened. "Ma'am." She cut him off with a glance, a look sharp enough to steady him, to bury the truth he had almost spoken aloud. She would not let them see her weakness, not now. The fog churned with movement. Figures lunged through it, bayonets flashing. Caught one with her blade, twisting, her breath a sharp exhale. Another rushed, and a ranger intercepted, tackling him into mud, the two vanishing in a struggle too brutal to watch. Everywhere it was the same, survival, one heartbeat at a time. And still the enemy pressed. His hand pressed hard against her ribs, her glove slick with blood. She forced it away again, forced her knife steady, forced her steps forward. Her silence carried more than orders now. It carried defiance. It carried the weight of every ranger still breathing. But inside her chest, she knew. This wasn't holding the line anymore. This was the end. A shadow loomed through the fog, a figure larger, broader, his rifle raised, bayonet fixed. Steadied herself, her breath ragged. She raised her knife, her empty rifle gripped like iron, her stance unshaken, even as her knees trembled. The figure lunged. She met him head-on. Steel clashed. Her knife slid along his bayonet, her rifle butt slamming into his jaw. He staggered but didn't fall. His blade came again, slashing across her shoulder, tearing fabric, drawing blood. She gritted her teeth, forced her body forward, drove her knife deep beneath his ribs. His breath caught. His eyes widened. Then he collapsed into the mud. Her chest heaved. Her side burned hot, her legs shaking. She looked up and saw only more shadows pressing through the mist. Her silence held, but her body was breaking. She wondered briefly if this was how it would end. Not in fire, not in triumph, but in silence, in fog, in mud, forgotten by all but the mountain itself. And then a voice cut through comms, one of her men, fierce despite the exhaustion. "They're falling back, Commander, they're breaking." Blinked, her breath caught. She raised her head. Through the fog the shapes blurred. Some were retreating, some stumbling back, their lines fraying, their voices sharp with panic. The wraith still haunted them. Her men saw it, their eyes lit faint but fierce, hope. Felt it too, just a flicker, just enough. She straightened her shoulders, her knife still slick in her hand, her rifle heavy across her chest. To her men she was steady. To the enemy she was legend. To herself she was only breath and blood. But sometimes that was enough. The pass grew quiet again, the fog folding back in, the mountain exhaling once more. But new. It wasn't over, not yet. The silence wasn't peace. It was only the pause before the last storm. How do you walk out of a place that has swallowed everyone else? The fog had grown thick again, rolling down from the ridges as if the mountain wanted to hide the ruin it had witnessed. Fires hissed and died under damp air. The echoes of gunfire had long faded. What remained was silence, vast, heavy, suffocating. The rangers moved like shadows through that silence, but fewer now. Too few. Every count of the living meant another weight pressing against their chests. Every step past a fallen comrade meant another rifle laid gently across still hands, another scarf pulled over a face, another name whispered only to fog. Cross walked among them, her ribs burning, her side wet with blood but her posture unbroken. Her braid clung damp against her back, her boots steady despite the tremor in her legs. She moved with deliberate calm, her silence more commanding than any words could be. But inside she knew. They couldn't endure another wave. Her men knew it too. They didn't say it. They didn't have to. It was written in their eyes, in the way their hands lingered too long on the rifles of the fallen, in the way their shoulders slumped when they thought no one was looking. The fog shifted. Engines rumbled again, heavier this time, louder, a sound that felt like inevitability itself rolling through stone and soil. The last storm had come. Pressed her palm against her ribs, the pain sharp, her glove slick. She forced it away, forced her shoulders straight, forced her silence steady. Her men looked to her, and she gave them the only thing she had left, the illusion of certainty. The enemy came in force, armor grinding forward, turrets swiveling, machine guns roaring. Infantry pressed tight behind, bayonets glinting in pale shafts of light. Mortars whistled down, tearing soil and stone into the air. The mountain shook. The rangers rose one last time. Knives, pistols, empty rifles swung as clubs. No hesitation, no retreat. Only silence turned into defiance. The pass dissolved into chaos again. Fire flashing in fog, figures colliding in mud, blades sliding between ribs, pistols cracking point-blank. Screams cut short, swallowed by mist. Every ranger fought like the breath in his chest was the last, because it was. Moved among them, her body screaming with every step, her knife slick, her empty rifle clutched like iron. She fought with ruthless precision, each strike measured, each movement exact. Her silence carried them still. Even at the end, her presence was anchor and shield. But one by one they fell. The young ranger who had steadied her before gone, his knife buried in an enemy's chest as he collapsed into the mud. The sergeant who had whispered doubts but followed anyway gone, his pistol empty, his final breath taken with his last shot. One by one, every ranger who had followed her into the fog became part of it. Until only she remained. Staggered, her knees buckling, her ribs burning hot. Her hand pressed to her side, blood seeping fast. The fog folded around her, heavy, clinging damp against her hair and skin. The enemy's shapes blurred in the mist, some fleeing, some searching, none certain what remained. And in that uncertainty, she found her survival. She moved like a shadow, slipping between trees, her breath shallow, her steps silent. She left the past behind, not in triumph but in silence. The fog embraced her, swallowed her, carried her away from ruin. By the time she reached the ridge, the battlefield was already fading behind her. The mountain exhaled again, its veil closing, hiding fire and blood, hiding sacrifice and silence. She paused at the tree line, her hand pressed hard against her ribs, her breath ragged. She turned once, looking back into the fog. She saw nothing, only gray, only silence. And she knew. She had walked out alive. But not alone. Because the mountain carried them now. The fog held their memory, their names whispered in silence, their sacrifice etched into soil and stone. The enemy would remember fear. The towns beyond would never know how close their ruin had come. And her men, her rangers, would never leave the pass, not truly. Lowered her head. Her braid hung heavy, damp against her chest. She turned and walked on, her steps steady despite the pain, her silence unbroken. She would carry them. Always. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.